The quiet stretch of sand along Long Island's southern shores had always seemed peaceful, the kind of place where families wandered on weekends, children built sandcastles, and the ocean whispered its endless lullaby. But beneath that calm surface, a chilling shadow had lingered for years, unseen, relentless, and utterly horrifying. The story of the Gilgo Beach murders, involving one of the most elusive serial killers in American history, would come to shatter the illusion of safety, exposing secrets and a darkness that had remained buried along the desolate coast. For decades, bodies surfaced and investigators chased elusive leads, yet the killer remained a phantom, taunting law enforcement and leaving families desperate for answers. The public's fascination grew with every revelation, every grim discovery along the shoreline, and with the arrest in 2023, a chapter that had haunted the nation finally began to close, though the fear and questions it stirred lingered. Tonight we will dive deep into the story of Long Island's most notorious serial killings, tracing the path of horror, obsession, and the ultimate pursuit of justice. The first bodies discovered along Ocean Parkway and Gilgo Beach were not immediately linked. Skeletal remains scattered across miles of sand dunes seemed like isolated tragedies at first, victims lost to time, crime, and circumstance. Yet investigators soon realized a horrifying pattern. Young women, often involved in the sex trade, vanished without a trace before their remains surfaced in secluded areas. The realization sent shivers through the Long Island Police Department, and a special task force was assembled to connect the dots. Each discovery seemed to raise more questions than answers, revealing not only the meticulous methods of a cunning killer, but also the tragic vulnerability of the victims. Families were left in anguish, some searching for missing daughters for years, only to learn the chilling truth of their fate. As the investigation progressed, the enormity of the case became clear. Over a dozen confirmed victims were eventually linked to what the media dubbed the Long Island serial killer, though some estimates suggested the death toll could be higher. Detectives combed through forensic evidence, interviewed hundreds of witnesses, and sifted through digital trails. But the killer's careful planning made identification incredibly difficult. It was not just the remoteness of the dumping sites that complicated the case. It was also the years of careful concealment and the lack of immediate connections between disappearances and discoveries. Each step forward in the investigation felt like navigating a labyrinth where danger lurked in the shadows, and the killer remained one step ahead. Public interest soared as news outlets reported the discoveries and theories proliferated. Blogs, forums, and podcasts dissected every detail, from the victims' backgrounds to the minutiae of forensic evidence. Families of the missing took to social media to appeal for information, hoping someone would remember a critical sighting or suspicious activity. The case also highlighted broader societal issues: the vulnerability of women in precarious professions, gaps in law enforcement communication, and the chilling reality that a predator could operate undetected for decades. The story became more than a crime narrative. It was a reflection of societal blind spots, of those who were marginalized and whose disappearances were often dismissed, until a pattern could no longer be ignored. Each new discovery along the beaches was accompanied by a flood of media coverage. Reporters and amateur sleuths scoured the coast, while investigators meticulously cataloged every piece of evidence, from clothing and jewelry to the smallest fragments of bone. The isolation of the beaches and the subtle erosion caused by tides complicated recovery efforts, sometimes destroying vital clues before they could be preserved. Forensic technology, however, slowly began to close the gap. Advances in DNA analysis, fingerprint matching, and digital tracking offered new hope. And for families of the victims, each breakthrough, however small, represented a glimmer of justice. But even with modern tools, the killer's identity remained elusive, a ghost hidden behind decades of meticulous planning and cold calculation. The psychological impact of the case extended far beyond the beaches themselves. Residents of Long Island were gripped by fear and suspicion, unsure if the killer was someone they knew or someone who had been walking among them unnoticed for years. Law enforcement officers struggled with the weight of the case, balancing the need for public transparency with the risk of compromising the investigation. Communities organized vigils, advocacy groups pushed for more resources for missing persons, and media coverage transformed a quiet seaside town into a focal point of national attention. The story of the Gilgo Beach murders was no longer confined to the local landscape. It had become a chilling testament to the persistence of evil, the resilience of those seeking answers, and the haunting reminder that some darkness can lurk in the most unexpected places. The investigation into the Gilgo Beach murders revealed an unsettling reality about the victims' lives before their deaths. Many of them were young women struggling to survive, some involved in escort work or other high-risk professions. Their disappearances often went unnoticed at first, blending into the background of everyday life until the skeletal remains surfaced along the remote beaches. Detectives began to piece together timelines, social connections, and digital footprints, attempting to understand not only how these women had vanished, but why no one had seen the warning signs. Each revelation painted a picture of vulnerability exploited by a calculating predator, a chilling reminder of how danger often hides in plain sight. Families, meanwhile, were left to confront the unimaginable truth that their loved ones had been targeted and hunted with methodical precision. The remote stretches of Gilgo Beach became somber crime scenes, meticulously examined by law enforcement for every scrap of evidence. Investigators combed through sand, tidal debris, and nearby wooded areas, often under harsh weather conditions, knowing that even the smallest clue could be the key to cracking the case. Forensic anthropologists studied bone fragments for signs of trauma or decomposition, while digital experts traced cell phone signals and online activity, constructing a timeline of the victim's final hours. The painstaking work revealed the killer's precision. Bodies were left in isolated areas, often partially buried or hidden to delay discovery. This methodical approach suggested not only planning, but a disturbing familiarity with the terrain, a knowledge that allowed the killer to operate undetected for years. As the years passed, the case became a labyrinth of leads, theories, and dead ends. Detectives struggled with the challenge of connecting disparate disappearances spanning decades. Some victims had vanished in New York City, while others disappeared from surrounding towns before their remains were found on Long Island. The task force faced mounting pressure from the public and media to deliver answers, but the killer's elusive nature frustrated every attempt at closure. Each breakthrough, however minor, a piece of jewelry, a trace of DNA, or a witness report, brought renewed hope. Though the haunting reality remained, the perpetrator had successfully remained in the shadows, continuing to challenge authorities while instilling fear in an entire community. Media coverage intensified the public's fascination, but it also complicated the investigation. News outlets and true crime enthusiasts scrutinized every development, proposing theories and speculating on the killer's identity. Amateur sleuths attempted to trace the connections, sometimes interfering with the investigation by visiting crime scenes or spreading unverified information. Yet the relentless attention also kept the case in the public eye, ensuring that the victims would not be forgotten and that every potential lead was examined. Families of the missing felt a mix of frustration and relief as the story gained national attention. They hoped the heightened scrutiny would finally lead to justice after years of unanswered questions. Psychological profiling became a critical component of the investigation. Experts analyzed the killer's methods, victim selection, and body disposal techniques, attempting to predict future moves or identify a possible suspect. The profile suggested a meticulous, organized offender, likely familiar with the region and confident in evading detection. Law enforcement worked to match the profile with known criminals in the area, investigating anyone with a history of violence, sexual assault, or other relevant offenses. Each line of inquiry was pursued with caution, aware that even a minor misstep could allow the perpetrator to vanish again, extending the cycle of fear and grief that had gripped Long Island for decades. By now, the Gilgo Beach case had become more than a series of murders. It was a symbol of societal neglect, the dangers faced by marginalized women and the challenges of confronting a cunning predator. Detectives, families, and communities persevered through frustration, fear, and heartbreak, united by the quest for justice. The beach, once a place of serenity, had become a haunting reminder of the fragile boundary between life and death, and of the dark persistence of evil hiding just beneath the surface. Every step forward was a small victory against a killer who had long operated with impunity. But the path ahead remained treacherous, filled with unanswered questions and the lingering terror of the unknown. The breakthrough in the Gilgo Beach investigation did not come easily. For years, the case seemed like an unsolvable puzzle, pieces scattered across time and geography. Each victim had a story, a life abruptly cut short, and yet linking them to a single perpetrator required patience, technology, and relentless determination. Detectives re-examined old files, revisited crime scenes, and pored over digital records with fresh eyes. The sheer volume of evidence was staggering, and every detail mattered. Clothing fibers, tire tracks, the way bones were positioned, all clues pointing to a methodical, calculating mind. Slowly, the outline of the killer's pattern emerged, revealing not only cruelty but cunning intelligence. The revelation sent chills through the task force. A predator had been operating in their midst, invisible yet precise, leaving a trail of despair for decades. As investigators dug deeper, new victims were identified, their remains connected through forensic evidence that had once seemed insignificant. DNA analysis, once a nascent tool, became a pivotal resource, allowing for connections across years and counties. Each identification brought relief to families, yet reopened wounds, forcing them to confront the horrifying reality of their loved ones' final moments. Public attention surged with each discovery, blending fascination with fear. The beaches, which had long been scenic escapes, now carried an undercurrent of dread. Locals whispered about what might lie hidden beneath the sands, and visitors could not ignore the grim history as they walked the shoreline. Fear had embedded itself into the very fabric of the community, leaving an indelible mark on Long Island. Law enforcement faced intense pressure to capture the killer, but the complexity of the case demanded patience. The suspect's meticulous nature meant that every move had to be calculated. One wrong step could allow decades of planning to remain intact. Detectives worked in shifts, reviewing every lead, every tip, and every scrap of evidence. They collaborated across agencies, combining resources and expertise, knowing that the slightest oversight could delay justice further. Surveillance, forensic reanalysis, and background investigations became daily tasks, all while trying to protect potential witnesses and prevent the killer from realizing the tightening net around them. The tension was palpable, a slow-burning suspense that pervaded every step of the investigation. Meanwhile, the media coverage continued to amplify the case, turning it into a national story. Crime shows, podcasts, and documentaries dissected every known detail, from victim profiles to the remote geography of the beaches. The public, gripped by horror and fascination, speculated endlessly about the killer's identity. Some theorists proposed elaborate scenarios, while journalists highlighted law enforcement missteps and investigative breakthroughs. Families were caught in the crossfire, balancing the need for privacy with the hope that attention would finally lead to answers. The weight of expectation pressed on both the authorities and those affected, creating a charged atmosphere where hope and despair were in constant tension. The psychological toll of the case on investigators cannot be understated. They had witnessed decades of human tragedy, piecing together lives abruptly ended by unspeakable violence. Detectives had to navigate the darkness of their work while maintaining professional composure, often haunted by images and stories of the victims. Counseling and peer support became crucial, yet the drive to catch the killer remained paramount. They knew that understanding the mind of the perpetrator, the meticulous planning, the choice of victims, the selection of disposal sites, was the only path toward ending the reign of terror. Each discovery, each piece of evidence, each small connection brought them closer to a breakthrough that could finally bring closure. The case of the Long Island serial killer was no longer just about the murders themselves. It was about justice, accountability, and the unrelenting pursuit of truth. It highlighted societal vulnerabilities and the consequences of invisibility for those living on the margins. Each layer uncovered revealed more about the killer's meticulous nature and the gaps in the systems meant to protect the vulnerable. For families, investigators, and the public, the story was a grim testament to perseverance in the face of darkness. The beaches themselves stood as silent witnesses, holding the memories of lives lost and the hope that finally, the shadow over Long Island would be lifted. The investigation began to reveal the terrifying extent of the killer's reach. Victims were not just isolated cases. Patterns emerged showing years of calculated abductions, often with victims lured from urban centers before their remains were deposited along the isolated beaches. Each discovery raised new questions. How had the killer avoided detection for so long? How had someone been able to operate with such precision without leaving obvious traces? Law enforcement faced an agonizing balance between protecting potential future victims and keeping their investigative methods secret. The community's anxiety deepened as more information leaked, and locals began to fear for anyone they saw walking alone, late at night, or along secluded paths. The notion of safety itself felt fragile, with the killer's shadow stretching far beyond the physical spaces of Gilgo Beach. Forensic breakthroughs began to breathe new life into the case. Advanced DNA profiling, combined with cross-referencing missing persons databases, allowed investigators to link previously unrelated disappearances to the same perpetrator. Items recovered from the beaches, personal belongings, remnants of clothing, even small fragments of hair, began to paint a more complete picture of the killer's methodical approach. It became evident that he studied his victims, understanding routines, vulnerabilities, and patterns before striking. Each discovery, while horrifying, brought law enforcement closer to identifying the individual responsible for decades of terror. Families long haunted by uncertainty felt cautious hope, understanding that justice might finally be within reach. The media, while essential in keeping the story in the public eye, also complicated the investigation. Sensational headlines, speculative theories, and armchair detectives often risked contaminating the case. Yet public scrutiny also ensured that no lead was ignored and that the urgency of the investigation remained high. Families of victims leveraged media attention to appeal for witnesses, release timelines, and highlight connections that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. The story of the Long Island serial killer became a cautionary tale of how societal invisibility could allow predators to operate, but also a testament to how relentless pursuit and public engagement could eventually illuminate even the darkest crimes. Psychologists and criminal profilers contributed significantly, creating a behavioral map of the killer's tendencies. They analyzed victim selection, disposal patterns, and the psychological triggers evident in each case. Their insights suggested a meticulous mind, highly organized and emotionally detached, capable of long-term planning without leaving the usual traces of impulsive violence. This understanding allowed investigators to anticipate possible actions, examine potential suspects, and refine their strategy. It also shed light on the profound psychological danger posed by someone who could methodically manipulate situations and exploit vulnerabilities without detection. Each piece of insight, while purely analytical, carried the weight of human lives lost and the hope of preventing further tragedy. Public fear and fascination intertwined, with true crime enthusiasts dissecting every development online, mapping out theories and potential suspects. For locals, the beaches were never the same. Children were warned, couples avoided isolated areas, and families remained hyper-vigilant. Law enforcement worked tirelessly, knowing that one misstep could allow the perpetrator to evade justice yet again. Each discovery, each forensic breakthrough was met with both relief and renewed anxiety. The killer had already managed to operate in the shadows for decades, and the lingering fear of his presence made every step forward tense and deliberate. Despite the decades-long terror, the investigation also revealed remarkable perseverance. Detectives navigated complex jurisdictional issues, revisited cold cases, and examined old leads with modern technology, uncovering connections that had been overlooked. Families, too, became vital participants, providing personal insights and advocating relentlessly for attention and resources. Slowly, the community and law enforcement began to piece together a comprehensive narrative of the killer's crimes, mapping a story of calculated abductions, meticulous concealment, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. The darkness that had hovered over Long Island for decades was finally being challenged, inch by painstaking inch. The arrest of the Long Island serial killer in 2023 brought a wave of emotions that had been decades in the making. Relief, disbelief, and anger collided as families learned that someone had finally been held accountable for the unimaginable suffering inflicted upon their loved ones. The investigation, which had spanned decades and crossed countless obstacles, had culminated in the capture of a meticulously organized predator. Law enforcement described the suspect as someone who had expertly concealed their identity, carefully studied the victims, and used the isolation of the beaches to evade detection for years. The arrest not only marked a turning point in the case but also reminded the public that even the most elusive criminals can eventually be caught when perseverance, and modern technology converge. The stories of the victims came sharply into focus once again. Young women who had vanished without warning were finally being recognized not only as statistics, but as individuals with lives, dreams, and families shattered by violence. Media outlets revisited their biographies, sharing photographs, personal stories, and the struggles that had made them vulnerable. For investigators, this humanization was both motivating and harrowing. Every piece of evidence represented a life lost, and every step toward justice carried the weight of decades of grief. Families, some of whom had spent years in despair, began tentative journeys toward closure, grappling with the knowledge that answers had finally emerged, but at a devastating cost. The investigation had relied heavily on technological advancements that were unavailable during the early years of the case. DNA profiling, digital forensics, and sophisticated mapping tools allowed law enforcement to reconstruct the killer's movements and connect seemingly unrelated crimes. Analysts examined cell phone data, bank transactions, and surveillance footage to identify patterns, uncovering a level of planning that had previously gone undetected. It became evident that the killer's methodical approach had been designed to delay discovery and minimize risk of identification, a chilling reminder of the cunning intelligence behind these horrific acts. Each breakthrough was a testament to the dedication of the investigators who refused to allow time to obscure the truth. As the arrest reverberated through the media, public reaction was intense. True crime enthusiasts, journalists, and ordinary citizens dissected every aspect of the case, trying to understand how such prolonged terror could have gone undetected. Social media buzzed with speculation, discussion, and at times anger toward law enforcement for perceived delays. Yet the arrest was undeniably a triumph of persistence over impunity, offering hope to families that justice, no matter how delayed, was possible. The chilling narrative of the Gilgo Beach murders, long shrouded in uncertainty, finally had a focal point: the man who had orchestrated decades of horror from the shadows. Despite the arrest, the scars left by the Long Island serial killer remained. Families faced the complex emotional aftermath, reconciling the relief of knowing the perpetrator had been caught with the grief that would never fully disappear. The psychological impact on the broader community was also profound. The beaches, once serene, were now permanently linked to fear and tragedy. Mental health resources, advocacy programs, and community support became vital in helping residents process the trauma that had lingered for decades. The arrest, while monumental, was only the beginning of a long journey toward healing. Law enforcement emphasized that the case highlighted the importance of vigilance, communication, and technological innovation in combating crime. The decades-long pursuit showcased the dedication required to solve complex cases, particularly those involving marginalized victims whose disappearances might otherwise be overlooked. For detectives, the arrest validated years of painstaking work, sleepless nights, and unwavering commitment to justice. For the public, it offered a grim but necessary reminder that predators can operate unnoticed, and that persistent investigation, public awareness, and modern tools are critical in holding them accountable. The shadows over Gilgo Beach had been illuminated, but the echoes of the past would continue to resonate for years to come. Even after the arrest, questions remained about the full extent of the killer's crimes. Investigators knew that what had been uncovered might only be a fraction of the truth. Skeletal remains, scattered across miles of beaches and remote areas, suggested there could still be victims who had never been found or identified. Each new discovery brought both relief and renewed horror, as families and law enforcement confronted the reality that the killer's reign of terror had been broader than anyone had imagined. The painstaking work of connecting these pieces continued, with every fragment of evidence offering a clue to the killer's methodical patterns and movements over decades. The realization that someone could plan so meticulously while evading detection for so long shook the very foundation of the investigation. Families of victims grappled with a mix of closure and lingering grief. The arrest offered justice in a formal sense, but the emotional wounds remained raw and complex. Parents, siblings, and friends who had spent years in anguish over missing loved ones struggled to reconcile relief with sorrow. Some found solace in the media attention and public support, while others withdrew, haunted by memories and the knowledge of the killer's prolonged deception. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate families, affecting entire communities who had grown up with the fear that someone capable of such cruelty had lived among them unnoticed. The arrest, while monumental, could not erase the long shadow cast over these lives. The media played a crucial role in chronicling both the investigation and the arrest, blending public fascination with a collective reckoning. Documentaries, podcasts, and news features delved into the complex web of events, exploring the lives of the victims, the challenges faced by law enforcement, and the terrifying ingenuity of the killer. Public curiosity was insatiable. Discussions ranged from meticulous forensic techniques to chilling theories about the perpetrator's mindset. This attention kept the story alive, ensuring that the victims' identities and stories would not be forgotten. The case had become more than a crime story. It was a reflection on societal vulnerability, the gaps in protection for marginalized individuals, and the power of persistent investigative work to ultimately reveal truth. Investigators continued to revisit cold leads and previously unexplored avenues. Modern forensic methods allowed them to re-examine old evidence with a new lens, and digital reconstructions of timelines provided insights that had been impossible in earlier decades. Each small revelation added clarity, yet also revealed the horrifying scope of the killer's actions. The painstaking detective work underscored the intelligence and meticulous planning of the perpetrator, whose ability to remain undetected had relied on careful observation and an understanding of law enforcement procedures. This ongoing process demonstrated that justice was not instantaneous. It required patience, precision, and unwavering commitment to uncover every hidden truth. Communities along Long Island slowly began to process the psychological aftermath. Local residents who had lived in fear for decades started to reclaim a sense of safety, even as the beaches retained their grim associations. Support networks, counseling programs, and advocacy groups worked tirelessly to assist families and residents affected by the case. The arrest did not erase the trauma, but it offered a framework for healing, a moment where the relentless pursuit of justice intersected with the need for closure. The narrative shifted from fear to resilience, demonstrating the enduring strength of those who had refused to let decades of terror define their lives. Ultimately, the Gilgo Beach case became emblematic of persistence in the face of darkness. It illustrated the power of modern investigative techniques, the necessity of cross-agency collaboration, and the profound impact of unwavering determination. The arrest of the Long Island serial killer was a milestone, yet the lessons of the case extended far beyond the courtroom. It was a cautionary tale, a call for vigilance and a testament to the enduring human capacity to seek truth and justice, despite unimaginable horror. The beaches, once scenes of mystery and fear, now symbolized both tragedy and the eventual triumph of persistence over cruelty. The investigation into the Long Island serial killer revealed chilling details about the perpetrator's methods. The victims were not only carefully chosen but meticulously manipulated, often lured under false pretenses. They were isolated, making it nearly impossible for anyone to intervene or track their movements. Law enforcement noted a pattern of strategic timing and location selection, taking advantage of remote areas along the beaches and nearby wooded terrain. Every disposal site appeared carefully chosen to delay discovery, and the killer's knowledge of tides, currents, and geography suggested someone intimately familiar with the region. The combination of cunning and patience painted a terrifying portrait, a predator who operated like a calculated strategist, leaving little trace for decades. Families of the victims remained a central focus in the investigation. Their tireless advocacy ensured the case remained in the public eye, pressuring authorities to allocate resources and attention. Social media campaigns, vigils, and interviews brought renewed awareness to each new development, emphasizing that these women were not merely statistics, but beloved daughters, sisters, and friends. Law enforcement worked to balance transparency with the integrity of the investigation, understanding that families' need for answers could sometimes conflict with the strategy required to catch such a meticulous killer. Every interaction, every tip was treated with urgency, reflecting the high stakes and the enduring human cost of the crimes. Forensic science proved to be the backbone of the case. Bone fragments, personal belongings, and digital traces were analyzed with unprecedented scrutiny. Advancements in DNA technology allowed investigators to link remains to missing persons, sometimes decades after their disappearance. Tire tracks, footprints, and other minute traces were meticulously documented, revealing patterns that connected separate cases into a coherent narrative. Each forensic breakthrough offered hope, but also underscored the cold precision of the killer, whose ability to elude detection for so long was a reminder of both human ingenuity and the limits of early investigative tools. The intersection of science and patience became the key to unraveling the decades-long mystery. The media's role continued to be a double-edged sword. While coverage kept the public engaged and ensured no lead was ignored, it also heightened anxiety within the community. Long Island residents, once unaware of the killer's presence, began to perceive every stranger, every unfamiliar activity with suspicion. Fear became a pervasive force, affecting daily life and creating tension in neighborhoods once thought safe. Journalists and true crime enthusiasts dissected timelines, victim profiles, and forensic details, sometimes aiding investigators, sometimes complicating the process. Yet the persistent attention reinforced the urgency of the case, highlighting the broader societal need to protect vulnerable populations and hold perpetrators accountable. Criminal profilers offered invaluable insights into the mind behind the crimes. Behavioral analysis suggested an organized, intelligent, and emotionally detached offender who carefully planned each abduction and disposal. The pattern of targeting marginalized women in high-risk professions pointed to an understanding of social invisibility, exploiting systemic gaps that allowed the killer to operate undetected. Profilers worked closely with law enforcement to predict possible movements, anticipate behavioral tendencies, and identify potential suspects, creating a roadmap that guided investigative strategy. This psychological lens provided not only clues about the perpetrator, but also context for understanding the enduring fear inflicted on the community. As investigators connected more dots, the scope of the Long Island serial killer's activities became clearer. Decades of meticulous planning, careful concealment, and exploitation of vulnerability revealed the extent to which a single individual could operate undetected. The arrest in 2023 was a turning point, but it did not diminish the gravity of the crimes or the suffering endured by families and communities. The beach's once idyllic escapes had become haunting symbols of loss and perseverance. The case remained a testament to the intersection of human resilience, scientific advancement, and the relentless pursuit of justice, proving that even the most calculated predator can eventually be brought into the light. The arrest of the Long Island serial killer marked a pivotal moment, yet the investigation continued with intense scrutiny to uncover every detail of the perpetrator's decades-long spree. Authorities delved into old case files, re-examined witness statements, and cross-referenced decades of missing persons reports. Each new connection revealed the meticulous planning behind the abductions, highlighting the killer's ability to operate undetected while exploiting systemic gaps in law enforcement communication. The sheer scale of the crimes forced investigators to reconsider not only the geography of the beaches, but also the societal structures that allowed such a predator to evade detection for so long. Every layer peeled back exposed a chilling reality. This was not a series of random acts, but a sustained, calculated campaign of terror. Families and communities, long haunted by uncertainty, faced a complicated emotional landscape. Relief that justice was finally being pursued mingled with grief over the years lost and the lives that could never be restored. Support networks, counseling programs, and advocacy groups became lifelines for those struggling to process decades of trauma. Public attention also placed a spotlight on these families, who navigated the delicate balance between sharing their stories to honor victims and protecting their own privacy. Each reunion with memories and evidence was both painful and essential, reinforcing the human cost behind the sensational headlines and cold statistics that had dominated media coverage for years. Forensic breakthroughs continued to shape the narrative. DNA matches, combined with modern investigative tools, connected previously unrelated disappearances to the same individual. Items recovered from the beaches, pieces of clothing, personal effects, even minute biological evidence, were analyzed with painstaking precision. Tire tracks, soil samples, and satellite imagery helped reconstruct the killer's movements and strategies, revealing a level of planning that stretched across years and miles. Investigators marveled at the cold calculation evident in the patterns of abduction and disposal, understanding that the perpetrator's intelligence and patience had been key to evading capture for decades. Each discovery reinforced the necessity of persistence, technology, and collaboration in solving complex cases. The psychological impact on investigators themselves was profound. Years of exposure to human tragedy, skeletal remains, and the intimate details of the victims' lives left a lasting imprint. Detectives often struggled with secondary trauma, balancing professional detachment with deep empathy for families. Peer support, counseling, and careful management of investigative duties became critical to sustain focus on solving the case. Yet, the drive to deliver justice, combined with the thrill of slowly unraveling a decades-long mystery, fueled their commitment. They knew that every small lead, every detail meticulously examined, brought them closer to exposing the full scope of the killer's actions. Media attention remained intense, both amplifying the story and keeping pressure on law enforcement. True crime enthusiasts, journalists, and concerned citizens analyzed evidence, timelines, and investigative strategies, sometimes aiding and sometimes complicating the process. Social media campaigns brought renewed visibility to the victims, emphasizing that they were not merely numbers, but individuals whose lives mattered. The interplay of public fascination and investigative diligence created a dynamic that both sustained momentum and tested the limits of discretion, as authorities navigated the delicate balance of transparency and operational security. As new connections emerged, it became clear that the Long Island serial killer case was more than a criminal investigation. It was a reflection of systemic issues and human resilience. The arrest in 2023 offered a sense of closure, yet the decades of terror, the lives lost, and the emotional scars remained. The case underscored the importance of vigilance, technological advancement, and coordinated effort in combating crime. Gilgo Beach itself, forever marked by tragedy, stood as a reminder of the thin line between safety and vulnerability, and the enduring power of justice pursued with unwavering dedication. Even after the arrest, the ripple effects of the Long Island serial killer case continued to reshape the community and law enforcement strategies. Families who had spent decades in uncertainty slowly began to reconcile the relief of accountability with the enduring grief of lost loved ones. Support networks and therapy became essential tools in coping with trauma that had spanned years, decades even. Communities that had lived under the shadow of fear began tentative steps toward healing, yet the memory of the crimes lingered like an indelible mark on the landscape. The beaches, once serene escapes, had become symbols of both tragedy and resilience, carrying the weight of human loss alongside the victory of finally bringing a predator to justice. Investigators turned their focus to uncovering the full scope of the killer's actions. Each piece of evidence, from skeletal remains to digital footprints, was meticulously examined to identify potential victims who had not yet been discovered. Old leads were reanalyzed using advanced forensic techniques that had evolved over the years, allowing law enforcement to connect dots that had previously been invisible. The meticulous nature of the killer's planning became increasingly clear, revealing not only an extraordinary cunning, but a deep understanding of human behavior and law enforcement protocols. Every step forward, though painstaking, brought investigators closer to a complete understanding of the crimes and the scale of the horror inflicted. Public fascination with the case reached a fever pitch, blending fear, curiosity, and empathy. True crime documentaries, podcasts, and media reports dissected each development, exploring the victims' lives, the investigative challenges, and the perpetrator's psychological profile. The story served as both a cautionary tale and a collective reckoning, highlighting societal vulnerabilities, the risks faced by marginalized populations, and the consequences of unchecked predatory behavior. Communities, families, and advocates used this attention to push for systemic changes, aiming to prevent future tragedies while honoring the memories of those who had been lost. The narrative evolved from mere horror to a broader reflection on justice, safety, and accountability. Psychological profiling continued to provide crucial insights. Experts analyzed patterns in victim selection, disposal locations, and timing, constructing a detailed behavioral map of the killer. The profile suggested someone organized, patient, and deeply calculating, capable of manipulating situations to avoid detection. This knowledge allowed investigators to anticipate potential actions, re-examine suspects, and better understand the thought processes behind years of carefully orchestrated crimes. Profiling also provided context for understanding the profound fear instilled in the community, shedding light on how one individual's methodical cruelty could disrupt countless lives while remaining hidden in plain sight. Families, who had long awaited justice, faced complex emotions as they navigated the aftermath of the arrest. Relief that the perpetrator had been caught mingled with enduring grief for loved ones whose lives were irreversibly changed or ended. Media coverage brought renewed attention to personal stories, photographs, and testimonies, emphasizing that the victims were more than statistics. They were people with hopes, dreams, and futures stolen too soon. Support groups, advocacy organizations, and counseling programs became critical in helping families cope with a tragedy that had spanned decades, ensuring that the human cost of the crimes remained at the forefront even as the legal process moved forward. The case of the Gilgo Beach murders ultimately became a landmark in criminal investigation and societal awareness. It highlighted the necessity of persistence, collaboration, and technological advancement in pursuing justice, especially in cases involving marginalized victims. The arrest in 2023 marked a triumph of human determination over decades of meticulous criminal planning. Yet the lessons of the case extended far beyond the courtroom. Communities, families, and investigators were reminded that vigilance, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of truth are essential in confronting darkness, and that even the most elusive predators can eventually be brought into the light. Even after the arrest, the chilling details of the Long Island serial killer case continued to emerge, revealing the meticulous scope of the crimes and the lasting impact on families and communities. Investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the final fragments of evidence, connecting disappearances spanning decades. Each recovered item, from personal belongings to skeletal remains, offered new insights into the killer's calculated methods. The scale of planning and patience required to evade detection for so long became increasingly clear, underscoring the terrifying intelligence behind the crimes. Yet with every revelation, the sense of justice in finally holding someone accountable began to take shape, bringing a measure of relief to those who had lived in uncertainty for so long. Families of the victims continued their journey of healing, navigating the complex emotions of grief, anger, and cautious hope. The arrest in 2023 provided closure in the legal sense, but the wounds of lost loved ones remained raw and enduring. Support networks, counseling programs, and community initiatives became lifelines, helping survivors and relatives process decades of trauma. Each public acknowledgement of the victims' stories, through media coverage, memorials, or advocacy efforts, ensured that their lives were remembered, not just the horrific circumstances of their deaths. The case became a reminder of the human stories behind headlines and statistics, emphasizing the need for empathy, awareness, and systemic change. The arrest also sent a powerful message to communities and law enforcement nationwide. No matter how meticulous a criminal may be, persistent investigation and advances in forensic science can eventually deliver justice. It highlighted the importance of coordination between agencies, public engagement, and technological innovation in solving complex cases. The decades-long investigation served as a blueprint for addressing cases of serial violence, missing persons, and exploitation of vulnerable populations. Law enforcement, families, and communities alike witnessed that unwavering determination, patience, and commitment to truth can overcome even the most calculated evil. Media coverage continued to play a dual role, informing the public while keeping attention on systemic issues revealed by the case. Documentaries, news features, and podcasts dissected the investigation, the arrest, and the profiles of both victims and perpetrator. The narrative emphasized societal responsibility, the risks faced by marginalized individuals, and the importance of vigilance. True crime enthusiasts and everyday citizens followed the case closely, their curiosity fueled by the enduring mystery and the eventual resolution. Public fascination, combined with responsible investigative work, ensured that the story would not fade into obscurity and that lessons learned would resonate far beyond Long Island. The Gilgo Beach murders left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness. They were a stark reminder of the fragility of safety, the vulnerabilities of marginalized communities, and the devastating impact of unchecked criminal behavior. At the same time, the case became a testament to resilience, the persistence of families, the dedication of investigators, and the relentless pursuit of justice that spanned decades. The beaches themselves, once symbols of idyllic serenity, now embodied both tragedy and the triumph of human determination in the face of darkness. The shadow that had lingered for so long over Long Island had been illuminated, if not entirely erased, offering lessons for generations to come. As we reflect on the Gilgo Beach case, we are reminded that justice is rarely immediate, but it is achievable through persistence, collaboration, and unwavering resolve. Families, communities, and law enforcement came together to confront decades of horror, proving that even the most elusive predators cannot escape accountability forever. The story of the Long Island serial killer is a somber reflection on human cruelty, but also a testament to the enduring power of perseverance and the resilience of those who refuse to let darkness go unanswered. Remember the victims, honor their stories, and never underestimate the strength of those seeking justice. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join us as we uncover more chilling mysteries, true crime cases, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We want to hear your perspective on this haunting case.